Something was about to change, and not in a positive way, as soon as Marcus Hensley entered the Monday meeting. During my 7 years with MapleCore Solutions, I've seen enough changes to recognize impending trouble. However, this storm had a polished watch, a well-tailored suit, and a handshake that was a fraction of a second too long. The new sales director, Marcus Hensley, was brought in to take us to the next level, as our CEO, Jennifer Lang, had put it, with a practiced smile. I experienced my first silent jolt of uneasiness as I observed him moving around the boardroom table. Callahan Aiden is my name, as a 39-year-old senior client relationship manager. I believed I had created something indestructible until that morning. From a tenacious few small accounts, I had expanded MapleCore's clientele over the previous 7 years to include some of Canada's leading manufacturers, logistics companies, and healthcare startups. Relationships over transactions was my straightforward strategy. I was an advocate for helping people, not just when a deal was on the table, but also when their children were ill, when they needed guidance, or when their enterprises were in danger of failing. I saw the senior staff lean in curious as Marcus introduced himself, using phrases like growth hacking, synergy, and aggressive acquisition strategy. I occasionally nodded courteously while leaning back with my arms casually folded. I had lived long enough to see that such statements frequently resulted in shifts that left decent people behind. I stayed for a while after the meeting, watching Marcus and Jennifer talk by the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over downtown Toronto. His grin was practiced, his speech polished, and he made wide gestures. Jennifer's laughter was a bit too dazzling. The uneasiness was now a constant throb beneath my skin as I turned back toward my office. I had a glass-walled office with a laptop on the desk. But next to it was a framed picture of my first MapleCore team, a shelf full of thank you notes from clients, a faded Blue Jays cap from a charity function, and a small, slightly dented mug that I had received from one of my first and biggest clients, Caleb Desrosiers, years ago. These items served as more than simply decorations. They served as a constant reminder of the confidence I had gained, and the small victories that had established MapleCore's standing long before Marcus's flashy marketing materials showed up. My phone rang as I settled into my chair. Marcus had requested a meeting. Just catch-up chat, no information. My stomach clenched. I saw that the shift had already begun as I was moving through the office. As I passed, the younger representatives were hunched down at their workstations, tapping at keyboards, their eyes darting up. The culture at MapleCore has always been one of cooperation, open doors talks in the hallway, and cooperative problem solving. However, something had changed this morning. The atmosphere was quiet, rigid, and cautious. The smile was there, polished and vacant, when I entered Marcus's office. He pointed to a seat. Thanks for your time, Aiden. I desired to establish a connection. I could feel the moment's weight pressing down on me as I sat. This was more than a friendly conversation. I wasn't sure I wanted to watch this unfold, but it was the beginning of something bigger. My phone buzzed once more as I was leaving his office. Passing the glass partitions that separate us all, but allowed everyone to see each other, and I saw that HR had requested a second meeting. As I clicked the notification, my chest constricted. At that moment, I was certain that the storm had just arrived. As we sat down, Marcus's eyes conveyed a different message than his slick grin. I had already witnessed that look, not in boardrooms, but rather at conference tables when rivals attempted to gauge my level of confidence prior to a pitch. It was the expression of someone who viewed individuals as parts of a board rather than as collaborators or coworkers. I noticed a tiny tightening of my jaw as Marcus sat back in his chair with his fingers steepled. "So Aiden," he said in a nearly syrupy voice, "I've heard a lot about you. Top performance client, fave 7 years here, amazing?" I said thanks in a neutral and courteous tone. He gave that same slick smile. "I've been brought in to make a few changes. Modernize, push the boundaries, and give the team a boost of enthusiasm." I nodded slowly, the words laden with significance. "That sounds exciting." Marcus's eyes became piercing. "I have been looking over your finances. Good figures without a question. Tell me nevertheless how scalable your strategy is. Although relationships are wonderful, we need to see quantifiable result systems that can be replicated. Steady growth." I rested my arms on the chair and leaned back a little. Marcus, relationships are predictable. People will return the favor when you invest in them. Although his smile remained constant, I noticed a hint of frustration flickering in his eyes. We're launching a few new projects, tighter reporting defined pitch scripts, and cold outreach quotas. I anticipate that the senior team will set an example. I could feel the first genuine fissure pierce the universe I had created. I have argued for a human-first strategy for years. Marcus now desired for us to become a machine of numbers. I returned to my workplace and gazed over the email describing the cross-training initiative. Maya Singh's health tech venture and Caleb de Rossier's logistics company, two of my largest customers, will be temporarily transferred to junior representatives for growth. I resisted calling them both at once, keeping my hands hovering above the keyboard. Rather, I slowly rotated the coffee mug Caleb had given me, which was cracked on one side and had a half-faded logo. Junior employees across the office nervously observed me, averting their gazes as I raised my head. There was a change in the atmosphere, uneasy looks, hushed discussions, and a feeling that the earth was shifting beneath us all. Later that afternoon, I was in a peaceful cafe close to Union Station. When Caleb leaned forward with a worried expression on his face, while sunlight streamed through the window. Cross-training, really, Caleb questioned, putting down his coffee. We're still with MapleCore because of you, Aiden. Do they not understand that? I'm beginning to believe they don't, I said, letting out a halting laugh. Caleb scowled and shook his head. Be careful, my friend. The atmosphere had soured by the time I got back to the workplace. Without me, Marcus was conducting one-on-one sessions with the junior representatives. Through the glass walls, I could see their anxious faces as they nodded rapidly. Took frantic notes and looked at me when they thought I wasn't looking. I passed HR hours later when the office was empty but for the faint hum of the air vents. I heard Marcus say, start preparing the team realignment plan through the cracked door. I managed to catch the words as I froze. Even as my chest constricted, I continued to walk, taking deliberate breaths and big steps. One idea became clear to me as I arrived at my workstation, and the dusk light faded into the city skyline outside. The storm was closer than I had anticipated, and it bore my name prominently. I was surprised by how quickly I was fired, but the consequences followed even more quickly. The HR meeting request arrived in my inbox on a gloomy Thursday morning. Please meet with HR Manager Sarah Atkinson at 10:30 a.m. There was no background information or agenda. However, I was aware. As I stared at the message with my fingers sitting motionless on the keyboard, my gut nodded. Sarah was sitting at the end of the table with papers neatly placed in front of her, and lovely eyes that seemed to be filled with sadness when I walked into the tiny conference room. With a tablet in hand and his smile as meticulously planned as ever, Marcus sat next to her. Aiden, Marcus said calmly, I appreciate you coming in. The team structure has been reviewed and regrettably some changes are being made. Calmly, I clasped my hands and sat down. Continue. Sarah cleared her throat. As part of this restructure, your role has been recognized. We will be terminating your job with MapleCore as of today. We would want to express our gratitude for all of your donations during the previous 7 years. Slowly, I nodded. No objection. Please don't. Not even the desire to identify all of the clients I had developed. The customers that had helped MapleCore turn a profit each quarter, I refused to let them witness my breakdown for their own sake. Sarah continued softly, by the end of the day, we'll need your laptop, phone, and badge. Obviously, I answered. In a daze of disinterest, I made my way back to my office. Framed pictures of client dinners. Trophies collecting dust and a crumpled post-it note from Maya Singh thanking me for speeding through. A last-minute contract amendment were all on my desk as I had left it that morning. The Blue Jays cap from the charity game Caleb had planned was in my hand. I carefully put it in the box with the picture frame and coffee mug. I sensed the looks outside the glass walls when I met their eyes. The junior representatives looked up and then hurriedly averted their gaze when no one wanted to admit the obvious. I could hear the rushed typing that pervaded the atmosphere. Never had MapleCore's open office transparency seemed so oppressive. My personal phone rang with a message from Caleb by the time I entered the elevator with the cardboard box in hand. What is going on over there? I received a new account manager introduction via email. Are you all right? For the first time that day, I gave a small smile. As dusk descended on the Toronto cityscape, I returned to my flat and sat on the balcony. Despite the distant noises of traffic below, the spring air felt chilly against my skin. There was no need for crystal glasses tonight, so I took a sip of bourbon from the broken coffee mug. Once more my phone buzzed. It was Maya this time. A junior representative recently gave me a call. Referred to him as my new contact. Tell me you're not going anywhere. Another text message appeared on the screen before I could make a reply. McPherson Jonah, I heard you're not in. Is this a joke, please? As the text continued to arrive, I reclined in my chair with my eyes half closed. All of my key clients had contacted me within 2 hours. They had sensed the change, the abrupt hollow ring of strange voices taking the place of the one they trusted, not because MapleCore had informed them. I let darkness to descend upon me with every ring of the phone serving as a subdued drumbeat of approval. My phone rang the following morning. As I was filling the mug Caleb had given me with coffee unknown figure, I nearly disregarded it. Hello, Aiden Jessica, Ning Hailtorm Technologies VP of Sales. I was informed of the events at MapleCore incredibly. So this week would you be able to meet? The corners of my mouth quirked into the first genuine smile I had seen in days as I ran a hand through my hair. Yes, does 9 o'clock tomorrow work for you? Perfect, Jessica answered, her voice full of respect, which is uncommon in this field. I stood for a while in the silence of my flat as I hung up. A 30-minute meeting had swept aside 7 years of creating something significant. However, Marcus and MapleCore had overlooked a basic fact in their rush to remove me. Relationships cannot be terminated. It is impossible to reorganize allegiance. This time, my phone buzzed with a message from Caleb. Coffee next week. Let's have a conversation. I exhaled softly like the first breath released after a long descent. With icy clarity, I realized that Marcus Hensley had committed the worst error of his career as I looked out my window at the city beyond. The glass buildings gleaming in the gentle pink of the early morning light. My phone buzzed again as I sipped my coffee slowly, while observing the dawn slowly crawl across Toronto's rooftops. Once more, Jessica, you should listen to what I have in mind. As I sipped my coffee the following morning, the first client formally shut down MapleCore. When Caleb's email arrived, I was sitting by my apartment window, taking in the early morning light streaming over the rooftops of downtown Toronto. Brief and direct, I just issued the official notice to MapleCore Aiden. All initiatives will be put on hold until more debate is had. My chest constricted not in fear, but in comprehension. This was the start. I had misjudged how quickly the ramifications would materialize. Messages came in one by one. Maya sent an email stating that she had asked for all of her account's documentation. Aiden, could you suggest someone on your end? Jonah asked in his voicemail. The air in my apartment felt charged like a storm brewing just over the horizon, and I'm not feeling good about this change. I met Jessica at a quiet cafe close to St. Lawrence Market at precisely 9 o'clock. She was all I had recalled from the few business conferences we had met, shrewd, calm, and genuine. She stood up as I walked over to her table, smiling confidently and holding out a hand. Aiden, I appreciate you taking the time. I shook her hand and said, thanks for getting in touch. After placing our coffee order, Jessica leaned forward a little as we took our seats. In our field, word gets around quickly. People have faith in you. Aiden, you can't make something like that. Trust only matters if you respect it, I said, taking a deep sip from my cup as the warmth grounded me. Jessica gave a nod. She slid a document across the table and found a proposal from the Director of Enterprise Relationships at Hailtorm Technologies, which explained exactly why she wanted you on board. A basic pay that was more than what I had earned at MapleCore. A performance structure that I could influence, and above all, autonomy. There was a catch, though. I raised an eyebrow and remarked, my MapleCore contract contains a non-compete clause. We've investigated it, Jessica said with ease. Termination without justification. These are hardly ever enforced by the courts here. However, to begin, we recommend a 60-day consulting agreement. Then complete employment keeps everything tidy. The decision was weighing heavily on me, but in reality, I had already made up my mind. I took out a paper at home and started outlining a plan not for retaliation, but for accountability. I was confident that MapleCore would play hardball and do all in their power to keep their best customers. I therefore turned to what I was most familiar with: relationships. I started by writing a manual for my previous customers. Nothing proprietary, just a straightforward paper outlining common contract provisions, including customer rights, termination procedures, and data portability. with the brief remark, sharing this in case it's helpful. Navigating your next steps, I sent it to Caleb, Maya, and Jonah via email. After that, I began calling as a friend rather than a salesperson. I wanted to check in with you, Jonah. How is the family doing? How are things doing for the team over there? I didn't make any recommendations or beg for favors. All I did was remind them that they were important. Unexpected things started to happen. By the conclusion of the week, Caleb was called by Maya. Jonah sent Maya an email. After connecting and sharing notes, my former clients, many of whom had never connected before, realized they weren't the only ones who were frustrated. Before long, they were setting up their own private meetings, exchanging ideas, and combining their resources. Marcus's hold was loosening back at MapleCore. Through word of mouth, I learned that he had begun contacting customers, directly offering high discounts, tagging on complimentary services, and attempting to fill the gaps. However, it was too late. The company's own lack of foresight caused the damage, not any intentional action on my part. Jonah sent me an email late one night that caused me to stop and think. A screenshot of an internal MapleCore email that he had inadvertently obtained was attached. We have determined the technical dependencies we can use to postpone the Callahan account's transitions. Legal thinks we can extend these strategies for at least 3 or 4 months before being penalized. I gazed at the screen, taking in the words. This was intentional hindrance, not merely awkward scurrying. With a brief note, you're going to want your legal team on this, I forwarded the email to Jessica. I felt a silent wave of resolve come over me as I clicked. Submit. Retaliation was no longer the focus of this. It was about ensuring that those who had put their trust in me wouldn't have to bear the consequences of someone else's conceit. And I let myself smile honestly and unguardedly for the first time in weeks as I leaned back in my chair and watched the city's lights come to life one by one. Because I was no longer the only target of the storm, Marcus was about to be hit, and this time he wouldn't notice it until it was over him. By the end of the week, Marcus was calling me instead of clients. It took place on a wet Thursday afternoon, the chilly spring rain that Toronto seems to be known for. My phone rang while I was in my apartment working on hailstorm consulting docs with my laptop open. I was aware that the caller ID was disabled. I waited for it to ring twice before answering. We need to talk, Marcus said in a tense but carefully regulated voice. Watching the raindrops make ragged lines down the window, I reclined in my chair. Do we? His smoothness was wearing thin, and his sentences were clipped. I think we both know things have escalated. Our customers, your previous customers, are getting challenging. We still have time to resolve this. A heartbeat too long, I allowed the silence to linger. Marcus, you ought to speak with them. Decisions are now being made by them. On the other end, I could hear his breath catch, act rationally. Aiden, these accounts belong to the company. I responded gently. And you're the one who let the relationships walk out the door. You didn't include that in your spreadsheets, did you? Click. The line died. Jessica gave me a call later that day. With a sharp yet enthusiastic tone, she stated, I just got off a board call. Our legal staff is prepared. If MapleCore attempts to impede transitions, the board has authorized full offensive action. Remembering Jonah's email, I muttered, they're already obstructing. They're clinging to those clients like a man on a life raft who is drowning. Jessica gave a little laugh. Then it's time to assist in sinking the raft. The change became obvious over the course of the following few days. Caleb attested to the fact that MapleCore's offerings had escalated to ridiculous proportions, including CEO visits, huge discounts, and complimentary services. Maya reported emails sent late at night. Marcus pleaded for a meeting in a voicemail that Jonah forwarded. I didn't have to do anything. The clients were moving independently, brought together by their mutual annoyance and the calm, consistent direction I had provided. Then I received the unexpected call. It's Jennifer Aiden. I hesitated, allowing that name to sink in. The CEO of MapleCore, Jennifer Lang, has not given me a direct call in 7 years. With a clipped yet exhausted voice, she replied, I'm calling to understand what's happening. Unprecedented client mobility is occurring. We think you might be affecting choices. I'm not, I said calmly. I haven't made any pitches, offers, or commitments. If they're leaving, it's because they don't trust your leadership anymore. A protracted hush ensued. Eventually, Jennifer added, we want to talk about bringing you back. Same posture, a 10% rise. We can't overlook the solid relationships you have. I put my thumb and fingers to the bridge of my nose and closed my eyes for a moment. Thank you for the offer, Jennifer, but I've taken a position elsewhere. Her tone became stern. I'm hoping you'll at least think about not actively stealing from our customers. What's already going away on its own doesn't need to be poached. The apartment seemed strangely quiet as I hung up. The streets were slippery and shining in the late evening light, and the rain had finally ceased outside. I inhaled deeply, the kind of breath you take when you know the most difficult part is already over. Jonah gave a call that evening. He remarked incredulously, Marcus offered me a 15% discount to stay. Then he disparaged, you said that you had performance problems and were leaving anyhow. I clenched my jaw. Classy. Jonah grinned as he stated, I told him we were exploring other options and hung up. I wanted to let you know. I thanked him, hung up, and took a time to sit in silence. Jessica showed up at my makeshift office at Hailtorm the following morning. It was a little bright room with blank walls and a desk covered with notes. With her arms folded and a gleam of amusement in her eyes, she leaned against the doorframe. She said, heard the news Marcus is no longer employed. I gave it a quick glance. That quick. The numbers did not sit well with the board, disliked the negative publicity. She grinned and said, I didn't like that half the clients are leaving. They are misrepresenting it as a change in strategic leadership. I quietly exhaled, my shoulders becoming less tense. Jessica came over and placed a folder on my desk. Jennifer extended her hand once again. A clean transfer is what they hope to negotiate. No early termination costs and complete data portability. Additionally, MapleCore is looking into acquisition possibilities. They want us to think about extending an offer. After giving her a long look, I chuckled quietly. I called after Jessica as she turned to go. When did you find out Marcus was out, by the way? Over her shoulder, she smiled. 15 minutes or so ago. I figured you would like to hear it. I leaned back in my chair and watched the morning light spread across the desk as the door clicked shut behind her, sensing the beginning of something new and much better. I took one more stroll through the well-known MapleCore lobby, this time as a prospective customer rather than an employee. 6 months had passed since Jennifer's last call, and the air in the foyer with its glass walls felt heavy today, as if it were burdened by everything that had happened before. The receptionist grinned nervously as I walked in. The marble floors shone as though they had just been cleaned, and I saw some familiar faces hovering at the elevators, their eyes darting toward me before swiftly averting. I never thought I'd return to MapleCore in this state when I left. However, I didn't think the board would quietly and frantically beg Hailtorm Technologies to buy them out, or that Marcus would be shown the door. Nevertheless, here we were. Jessica strolled next to me, her pointed shoes clicking boldly on the shiny floor. With a hint of humor in her voice, she whispered, They know you're here, Aiden. Avoid frightening them too much. I gave a small smile. I'm not here to wield a weapon. Jennifer Lang waited at the head of the table as we were escorted into the main meeting room. She appeared older now, or perhaps simply more worn out. Although her jacket was spotless and her face was composed, her fingers drummed restlessly against her coffee cup. As we walked in, she stood to shake my hand and said, Aiden, I appreciate you coming. Of course, I said, maintaining a steady tone and a forceful yet courteous grasp. We took a seat. The lawyers and executives took over for the following hour, working out the last issues such as leadership reorganization, data transfers, and staff retention strategies. As though she was still figuring out how I ended up sitting on this side of the table, I kept seeing Jennifer's gaze dart toward me. After the last documents were signed, I got up and went to the window to gaze at the skyline of Toronto. I had changed, but the vista remained the same. I convened the remaining MapleCore staff in the main conference room following the meeting. Recognizable faces, all silent, some worried, some interested, I inhaled. My voice echoed across the room as I said, I'm not here to clean house. The reason I'm here is that the foundation of what we're creating at Hailtorm is relationships. Have faith, responsibility. That is what has kept our customers loyal and will continue to do so. I noticed several slight smiles and shoulders loosening. These folks were decent, but they got caught in the wrong storm. I went on, if you want your jobs, they are secure. Your input is important. And in exchange, I only ask that you approach everything you do going forward with the same dedication to partners, clients, and coworkers. A soft mutter of relief was heard. At the rear, I saw Sarah from HR, who nodded appreciatively. I went through the sales floor by myself once the room was empty. Although it had been emptied for a long time, my old desk was still there. The imprint of memory was clear when I paused next to it and delicately ran my fingers over its surface. Late night calls, early morning coffee, the thrill of closing a deal, and the silent satisfaction of finding a solution for someone who mattered. When my phone buzzed, it was Caleb's message. Heard the news, poetic justice, buddy. I put the phone back in my pocket and grinned. I went back to Hailtorm the following day. Jessica smiled broadly as she greeted me at the door. We already have contracts with 15 of MapleCore's top 18 clients, and your promotion was just finalized by the board. I arched an eyebrow. As she gave me the formal letter, she introduced herself as the Executive Vice President of Strategic Relationships, effective immediately. Without any pomp or statement, I simply shook hands and accepted the letter. Now the art itself was more important to me than titles. The press release was sent out that afternoon. Notes flooded my phone, congrats. Requests from the media and notes from old co-workers. Jonah, however, was the most notable message. I'm honored to be a part of your creation. Let's get together soon. The afternoon light spilled across my desk as I sank into the chair and shut the door to my office. I took out the ancient coffee mug Caleb had given me. It had a little chipped handle and a weathered branding. It had accompanied me during my ups and downs, victories and setbacks. I considered all that had been required to get here as I gazed out over the horizon. The city pulsing with subdued energy, the treachery, the perseverance, the hard-won clarity. And I realized that although retaliation may have started the process, it was never the end goal. The goal was to create something better and more durable. I retreated when I heard a knock on my door. My helper peered in. This is Jennifer Lang. No appointment. After hesitating, I nodded. Take her in. Jennifer walked in, her face unreadable. On my desk, she placed a folder. She said, MapleCore is looking into acquisition options. We would like Hailtorm to think about extending an offer. The sale finalized 3 months later, not out of revenge, but because it was a wise business move. I took a final tour of MapleCore's former offices on the last day. I looked out at the city from the window next to where I used to work. Caleb sent me another message and my phone buzzed. It said not about justice, but about creating something better. I grinned, put the phone in my pocket and turned to leave the old walls. The trophies and the past behind what was important was waiting to be constructed. I will never forget the silent victory that followed, but I will never forget the sense of betrayal I had as I left MapleCore that day. There are innumerable stories like mine, people who were disregarded and undervalued only to come back stronger when everyone else believed they were done. Be aware that success doesn't always roar if you're currently dealing with unfairness. Sometimes it's the slow, methodical process of building patiently, keeping loyal to your principles, and allowing your integrity to speak louder than rage. Retaliation will never go you as far as patience, fortitude, and astute planning. I appreciate you taking the time to read this tale. I encourage you to comment below if it spoke to you. You might even want to share your own story. If you want to hear more stories like this, remember to hit the subscribe button and leave a 1. Please feel free to share this video with anyone you know who could use a little motivation today. Together, let's continue to create a community that grows and learns.